Hi, I'm Jonathan Oxer, and this is SuperHouse. ITEAD have recently released 3 new models of Sonoff, and I think they are among the most important that they've released so far. They are the Sonoff Basic R3 DIY, the Sonoff Mini, and the Sonoff S55. One of the things that's really interesting about them is that all 3 of these models demonstrate that ITEAD is listening to their customers. There have been all sorts of requests for different types of products over the years, or variations on the Sonoff line, and these 3 models are all really direct responses to things that customers have been saying. The Sonoff Basic R3 DIY adds a DIY mode because, of course, right from the start, Sonoffs have been hacked to add your own firmware and use them in offline mode and that sort of thing. The DIY version has a jumper that allows you to do that. And the idea is that the manufacturer is enabling this out of the box. It's not something that you have to hack into it. The Sonoff Mini is something that is really tiny, and it's designed to be fitted behind an existing switch plate. If you compare it to a regular Sonoff, it's really astonishingly small. You can remove a light switch, put the Sonoff Mini behind it, and it all fits really nicely. The S55 is a GPO, general purpose outlet, or what most people call a power point. The Sonoff S55 is called that because it has ingress protection rating, or IP rating, to 55. You might recall from a previous video that IP ratings generally have 2 digits. The first digit is protection against solid access, like particles or dust or fingers, and the second number is protection against liquid access. So IP rating 55 means that it's sealed well enough that you get minimum access from things like dust, and it also means that it can withstand direct water against it, like a stream of water from a hose. So a power point that is rated to IP rating 55 is suitable for outdoor use, like this one. This is an outdoor power point on my back veranda. And this is really useful if you want to plug in things like a sound system when you're having a party, or lights, or a TV, or vacuum cleaner out here on the veranda, or something like that. Or maybe you want to control like a pool pump. There are lots of cases where you need an outdoor power point, and being able to control it from your home automation system can be very useful. In the case of a pool pump, you might want to set it up so that your home automation system can control when the pool pump runs, or a filtration system. That sort of thing is often done with manual timers, but if the power point itself can be integrated into your home automation system, it gives you a whole lot more flexibility. There are 2 things that make the Sonoff Mini such an interesting device. The first is obvious, it's right there in the name, and that is that it's so small. If we compare it to a regular Sonoff Basic, which is already fairly small, the Sonoff Mini is tiny. It's half the length, it's a little bit thinner this way. It's basically just a very, very small device. It's not quite as small as something like the Shelly. So this is the Shelly, which is intended to be equivalent to this. You can see the Shelly is actually slightly smaller again, but it's very much in the same sort of class as the Shelly in terms of its dimensions. And what this allows you to do is put it into the cavity directly behind a power switch, like on a light switch. With the regular Sonoff, it's a little bit large, so if you take the switch off, you need some space in the cavity behind it. Fitting that into a switch cavity is a lot harder than fitting that. And what this means is that it's much easier retrofit for doing things like switching over lighting and keeping the original light switches and everything in place. A lot of people don't want a light switch that looks too out there. And there are very interesting devices like the Sonoff Touch. So you can replace your light switch with a smart light switch, but that may not fit the aesthetic of your house. If you want something that looks a bit more traditional, then a lot of people will want to keep original light switches and then automate them somehow. And this device allows you to do exactly that. But that brings us to the second point. The second thing that's really interesting about this is that it's the first Sonoff device that has specific connections here for a changeover switch. Now, with a regular Sonoff Basic, it has an external button that you can press, and you can use that to toggle it locally. And of course, you can control it over Wi-Fi. But it doesn't have any provision built in for using an external switch to control it. Now, I've shown in previous videos how to hack the BASIC so that you can do exactly that, but with the Sonoff Mini, that's built in. These two screw terminals here, S1 and S2, are specifically for connecting a switch. But it gets even more interesting, because with the software on a regular Sonoff, the external switch is a momentary button, which means that each time you press it, it changes state. The software on the Mini is designed to have a switch that toggles between different states, on and off. Now this means that you can use just a regular light switch and connect it into those terminals. So on the Sonoff Mini here, we've got the two connections for the switch. We can just take a regular mains light switch, which is a changeover type, it's not momentary, and put it into those two connections. And then each time the switch is toggled, the output will change state. We'll see how that works in just a moment. I'm going to wire this up as you normally would, and we'll give it a test with the built-in firmware, the eWearLink system. So I have here a bayonet light fitting. I've got mains power coming in from here, active and neutral, and I've got mains coming out here, active and neutral. So what I can do is just connect on the input side, active and neutral. On the output side, active and neutral. And you can also see just down here that the Sonoff Mini has an external antenna. And I think part of the reason they might have done this, that's the antenna just there, is a lot of the time the Sonoff Mini is intended to be put inside a metal junction box or a backing box behind a wall plate. So what you could do is feed this through a hole in the box and have it on the outside of the metal box. That way you get better coverage. So now we have power coming in here, we've got the earth connection bridged across, and we've got a light on here. So I'll just turn on power. It's now powered up. You probably can't see it on the camera, it's just showing up. The LED is flashing there to show that it is in pairing mode. So what we can do is go through the regular process of setting up with a eWearLink. I've got the app installed on my phone, and the device is in pairing mode because it's all just been set up. So I'll just click plus to add a device and quick pairing. It already knows the username and password for my Wi-Fi, so I'll just click next, and it now looks around for a device. It's got about a 3-minute timeout on it, and in a few seconds we should see whether it's discovered anything. It says found second generation device, so that didn't take very long, probably 10 seconds or so. And now we can claim the device and give it a name. And I'll delete the name and I'll just call it Mini. That'll do. And complete. Added. Okay, so we now have a device called Mini, and this is bound to it. So if I click this button, we should now be able to turn the light on and off, just as you would expect. So it's working just like you would expect a Sonoff Basic to work. The difference is that it has those terminals for the external switch. Let's hook those up now. First I've got to turn off power and disconnect it because I don't want to kill myself. And I've got this regular changeover switch, it's not a momentary switch, and I'm going to wire that into the switch terminals, so S1 and S2. Now we have the Sonoff Mini with power. We also have the external switch, and I'll go back into the app, turn power back on. So we've now just powered up the Mini, and we should be able to control it as before. So if we click on it, we can turn it on and off. But now we also have this switch. If we flick the switch, it controls it. But this is the tricky thing. What we can do is turn it on with the switch, off with the phone. On with the switch, off with the phone. On, off, on. And you can see that the state is remaining synchronized between the switch and the phone. Even though the phone is basically acting like a button, and the switch here is a changeover switch. Now this is almost the holy grail of light switch replacement. It means you can keep your existing light switches and just set them up so they can be controlled from your home automation system. But almost as importantly, it means they work exactly the same way as before. That way when people come into your house, they can flick the switch, everything does what it's meant to, and nobody's confused. But you can also control it from your automation system. Now the switch itself, we're reusing the mains switch here, but this is not actually switching mains. This is just a logic input to the microcontroller inside the Sonoff, which means this switch could be anything. It doesn't have to be mains rated, but we have the flexibility now of leaving the original switches in place. But right now, this Sonoff is still running the original airway link firmware. Let's do something about that. We can put Tasmota on and get all of the cool functionality that that provides, including total local control. Opening the Sonoff Mini is pretty easy. Just get your fingernail in the edge there, give it a squeeze. The cover pops right out and you can get the PCB out. There's a little jumper on here which you can use to put it into DIY mode. That's how ITEAD intend for you to reflash it. But the problem is the process is really complicated and it requires you to have a Windows machine, which I don't have. So I'm not going to bother doing that process. It takes a whole lot of setup and it's basically just a pain. But there are other ways you can do it. Now if we look on the bottom, you can see these tiny little dots just here. These are test points and these expose the programming header the same as on a regular Sonoff. So if we slide across to the microscope just over here, you can see the test points just up here. Now I'm just going to get some multimeter probes to point with because those test points are really quite small. Now if we look just down here, you can see ground, 3 volts, TX and RX. These are the same as the connections that you find on a regular Sonoff. So you can solder jumper wires onto those and reflash it with Tasmota the same way you normally would. I'm going to put this pin-up diagram on the SuperHouse page for this episode, so if you want to connect to this and do it yourself, you can easily grab the diagram from there. But those pads are really small, so I'm going to try something different. I came across this really interesting project to make a 3D printed programming jig for the Sonoff Mini. It uses these little devices called pogo pins. And I use them for things like this. This is a little test fixture. It's got these spring-loaded contacts and a button, and I use this for testing Freetronics modules. These pins make contact with parts of the PCB, and when I push it down, the switch is activated, the test is run, and you get a result. Now this particular project uses pogo pins to make a structure like this, which can then be used to program the Sonoff Mini. Pogo pins come in a variety of sizes and tip styles. The ones I find the most useful are B1, which is really good if you're going onto flat test pads, LM3, which is perfect for going into normal through-hole pads, and Q2, when you want to go onto the bottom of something like a pin from a through-hole part that's sticking through the PCB. The pins come in a few different thicknesses too, so a P75 is 0.75mm thickness. To go onto the test pads on a Sonoff Mini, what we need is type B1. So I'm going to use a P75 B1, 0.75mm diameter with a conical tip. I've printed out the pieces from that project. I'll put the link for that in the video description. And I've soldered onto the edge of the onto the side. So if I stick this under the microscope, you can see just down there, there are wires connected to the sides of the pogo pins. This is not normally how pogo pins are used, but it works in this case. And then the wires from the pogo pins come back around to a 4-pin header. And I've arranged that so that the connections are in the same order as a normal Sonoff programming header. This 4-way header is just super glued onto the plastic of the base. It keeps it there nice and firmly. The little spacer is now pushed down over the top. That helps keep the pogo pins aligned vertically. And now this top piece can fit down over the pogo pins. So now we have the pogo pins coming through in the correct position, and the Mini should be guided into that position by this structure. And I think I'm also going to super glue this structure together just to make it a bit more rigid, because it sort of flops around a little bit at the moment. It's now nicely super glued together, so it's all rigid, keeps everything in place. And because this header is the standard Sonoff format, I can use my Sonoff programming adapter and just plug it in here. But what I'm going to do is hook the Sonoff Mini under the front, push it down on the back, and then I've got this rubber band, so I'm just going to wrap this around to hold it in place. On a normal test jig there'd be a little clamp that goes on. Wouldn't be as dodgy as this, but this will do the job, I think. So now I'm going to hold down the button, and while I'm holding it down, plug in the programming adapter. If I let go now, that should be in programming mode. Let's slide over to the computer. I've got ESP tool ready to go, and look at that, it's discovered the chip, and it's now flashing it with Tasmota. And programming is done, so we now have our Sonoff Mini all flash with Tasmota. We can take it out of here, power it up, and configure it just like we would any other Sonoff. I've put the Mini back in its case and wired it up the same way we had it before. So you can see we've got power coming in here, and I've got the switch wired to the S1 and S2 terminals, and we have a lamp. Just got to turn it on. It's not on at the moment, and we can see that it's powered up. It's now in pairing mode. We can do the usual thing. Let's see if we can spot it. There we go, Sonoff 6283. I'll select that. It'll do its little captive portal trick, and then I can connect it to my own Wi-Fi. So the Sonoff is now rebooted, connected to my house Wi-Fi, and I should be able to change the state of the output by pressing the button. Let's see what happens when we flick the switch. Flick it once, nothing happens. If we use the toggle button on the web interface, the Sonoff works fine, but the switch still doesn't work. The way to solve that is to come into blackadder.github.io. I'll put this in the episode page so you can go and check it out. And what you do is come along in here, and we're going to search for the Mini, the Sonoff Mini, and you can see that there is a template for it. Copy the template. Come back to the configuration here for the Mini. We're going to Configuration, Configure Other, and at the moment I don't have a web admin password on there. Paste that template into there, make sure Activate is ticked, and save. The Sonoff will then reboot, and it will now have the configuration set up specifically for this board. So now we're back, but now it's set up as a Sonoff Mini. We can toggle it through the web interface, and if I slide back on over to here and pull up my phone, and also the switch. So the switch is now working, and I've got a device set up here. I set it up in Node-RED, so I can now control it from here as well. Turn it on from my phone, off from the switch. Everything works exactly as it should. So by using that template in Tasmota, we've got the Sonoff Mini working exactly the way we want it to. I can control it using MQTT through Node-RED on my phone, and the local switch works the way it should as well. Now this programming jig made the job actually quite easy, but as I was digging around on the PCB, I discovered that GPIO 0 is also exposed on our little test pad, and so is reset. And that gave me the idea of making a more advanced version of this programming jig. So I've designed a PCB, and it's being fabricated right now. I should have the boards in the next few days, and I'm going to follow that up with an episode later about a more advanced programming jig that will do auto reset. It may also be a little bit easier to assemble because the pogo pins will be set in a PCB, which will locate them quite accurately and give them good support. So the Mini is cool, but what's got me really excited is the S55. That might seem a bit strange because this is quite a niche product. It's an outdoor power point, and how many times do you need one of those? But what I'm really interested in is this leading the way to regular power points that you can use indoors. So much of home automation is focused on lighting control, and that's really been done to death. Once we can control power on our power points and have both local control with a switch and be able to control them through the home automation system, that opens up so many other possibilities. If you buy a modern GPO, it's an integrated unit. The switch and the socket are all part of the same assembly. This is partly for convenience, partly for safety, It means that for an electrician they only have to wire in active, neutral and earth, and everything is taken care of inside the switch. But that means that there is no way to separate control of the output from the switch. With old style switches, as we were transitioning to this new style, it used to be that the switch was a separate keystone device and the socket was just wired directly through. Now this is not quite the same thing, but it's a reasonable example. You can see here the switch on the back is a keystone type switch, and typically this would have been wired directly through to the socket. So what the electrician could do is wire power into the switch, loop it from the switch into the socket, and that way you have control over the output. But modern switches aren't made that way. They're all integrated. If we still had this old style separated with the switch and the socket, it would be really cool, because what we could do is take something like a Sonoff Mini and treat this the same way we would a light. The switch would be connected to the S1 and S2 inputs on the Mini, and then we would run power to the Sonoff and then power from there to the socket. Then we would have control locally with the switch, and we could also control it from the home automation system. But we can't do it that way, and I think that is why the S55 is so interesting. If you could take off an existing GPO and replace it with one that is controlled from your home automation system, it opens up many possibilities. Now we can partly solve that problem using devices like the S26. These are all plug-in devices, so if you've got a standard GPO on the wall, just leave that turned on all the time, have this plugged in, and now we can run Tasmota on this, or eWeLink if you like, and we've got internet control and you've got local control by pressing the button. But having it like this as a big external thing is really ugly. It gets in the way. It'd be so much nicer if the contents of the S26 was just built into the power point. Then the power point could be controlled locally with the switch and also via the home automation system. I'm really curious to see what's inside this. I haven't seen one of these before, so let's open it up and find out. It's provided with the cover separate like this, because the way it's meant to be mounted is you open it up, make the mains connections in here, screw this onto the wall, and then the enclosure is all sealed up so that it's weatherproof. But I'm not really interested in that. I'm interested more in the electronics that are inside it. And I can already see, before we even pull the board out, that there is a header just in here which looks like a programming header. It's got VCC, RxD, TXD, ground and log. So perfect. It means we can flush this thing with Tasmota. I'm going to pull that PCB out and have a closer look. Alexa, please turn on the soldering iron.
Okay.
Aha, voice control soldering iron. With this header in place, now we can connect one of my little Sonoff programming adapters, and that's one of the adapters on its own. This is the same thing, it's just connected to the USB serial adapter, and I can plug it in here. But we need to put it into bootloader mode. This is the button that's used to externally turn the relay on and off, and even without looking at it through the microscope, I can just trace along here. The track from that button comes along here, traces around, and it looks like it goes up to GPIO 0. So I'm pretty confident that if I just press and hold that button while it's powering it up, it'll go into bootloader mode. Let's give that a test. I'm going to press and hold that, and I'm going to plug in my programming adapter, keep holding for a couple of seconds, let go, and now I'm going to go back to the computer and I'm going to use ESP tool to try to load it. And look, there it is. It's detected an ESP8285 processor, and now it's uploading Tasmota. You could use PyFlasher or whatever software tool you like. I just happen to use ESP tool. So now we have Tasmota loading onto that, and in just a moment we should be able to connect to it, control it just like any other Sonoff. All done. I've wired up power to this. I've just got neutral, earth and active going in on those connections. Normally this would come up through a conduit or there'd be a grommet on there or something, but this is just for bench testing. Now, let's see what we can find. Look, there's Sonoff 2673 is showing as a Wi-Fi access point. So we'll select that. Look, now we've got the basic configuration page. Now I can set it up in exactly the same way as I would a normal Sonoff. And now that Tasmota is installed and configured, I can treat this just like any other Sonoff device. So I've set up a device as S55 GPO in Node Red. I can turn it on and off from there. You can see the LED inside going on. And the button works as well. What I did was select the S2X profile. There's no S55 profile in Tasmota, but it doesn't seem to matter. I've also got it linked through to She Who Shall Not Be Named, so I can do things like say, Alexa, please turn on test GPO.
Okay.
And there we've got it. In many ways, this is really simple. It seems very underwhelming. It's really just a Sonoff. But what is cool about this, and having it in this, this form factor, is that it is a GPO. Everything is built in. So with this mounted on your wall, you've got a regular GPO that you can turn on and off using the button, and you can also control from your home automation system. And I think that is actually really, really cool. So, are the Sonoff Mini and the S55 perfect? No, not even close. The S55 has a problem that you can't run cables in from the back, so if you want to wall mount like this, you have to use a conduit coming out the bottom and then going into the wall. And the DIY mode on the Mini is a great idea. It's a good principle, but it's a horrible implementation, so it's much harder than it needs to be, which is why I resort to using direct connections to the circuit board instead of the software update. And both of these should have power monitoring. I think that should be in all Sonoff devices now. It's really useful to get insight into how much power different devices are using. But that said, I think these are still pretty much the best Sonoff devices that I've seen so far. And I think the Mini is probably my new favourite. I would use this in place of the Sonoff Basic just because it's got those switch terminals on it. It makes it so convenient. And the size is a big bonus as well. So if ITEAD brought out a version of the S55 that wasn't IP rated, it was just a regular internal GPO double outlet with power monitoring, that would be pretty much the holy grail of Sonoff devices. So thanks for watching. I'm going to be back soon with a video about the active-only single-wire Sonoff Touch, which is a really interesting device. In the meantime, go and make something cool.